Hey, everybody. Welcome. It's town hall time. Hang close. You might see me have a total breakdown. It might happen in an hour. It's good to see everybody. I realized that I had made this incredibly elaborate plan during town hall. Do you know where I'm going? Carolyn knows where I'm going with this, I think. Yeah, right? The book, the big elaborate plan. And then I forgot to remind people that there was a big dramatic plan to talk about this book. So I think we could still talk about it. It was the first, we were going to talk about the first 2 chapters. You did the reading, Beth? Well, then we're doing it then. All right. I mean, the book was on my desk. I mean, so I'm ready to go. Like, I got questions. I got Post-it notes. I got the whole thing. All right, cool. Then let's talk about the book. So if anybody's watching this later, you can play along at home and check in on Twitter on AT Chat and leave your comments. But we are talking about everyday instructional coaching. 7 daily drivers to support teacher effectiveness. The amount of times I go through this book, I'm surprised that I have to look to read what that little subtitle is. Kelly Fonner forgot to buy the book. That is very sad. This is why you do dramatic Amazon purchases the second someone talks about it. You just order it and just so it, or Kindle, and have it drop right to you so you don't forget.
I just checked. I had ordered it and I just checked it. It says it was delivered Saturday, but I don't recall getting it. So I'm gonna have to go check.
Well, now someone somewhere, Kelly, is reading your book.
I'm assuming one of my children probably took it in.
Yes. And they're all excited because they intercepted an Amazon package till they open it. And they're like, all right, that's not really, I'm not looking for that.
Yep.
All right. So we said we would talk today about the first 2 chapters, which are, let me get my piece of paper out, collaboration and transparency. So let's start with chapter 1. I don't have a real good plan of how to do this. So I'm gonna just drop the question bomb and wait for somebody to start talking. I'm going to go that way. So the little like blurb at the front of the chapter for collaboration, how can we transform collaboration by promoting diversity, embracing dissonance, and ensuring balance? I leave it to the group. Thoughts on a big takeaway from chapter 1, your big Post-it note moment. You got one? I see your mic.
I don't have a big post. I know it's then you made it like a big prompt. I'm like, ooh, I don't have that. And I put in the chat, I didn't read it either. I forgot it. I've had it, but I just haven't read it. So I'm skimming along as we're getting started. But what I like is on page 8, talking about the pause strategy. Yeah. And how the very first one is really looking into what's being said that's not actually being said. Right. So looking beyond what people are communicating with words, are they not giving you eye contact? Are they disassociating? Are they starting to do other things when we're trying to have a meeting? What's actually being said there? And I think that's so important to consider and remind people to consider, that just because they are checking the boxes and saying the right things, that we might be looking for some other things that are actually going on beneath the surface.
Yeah, I like that. That is actually my first Post-it note in this chapter is about pause. Yeah, I agree. I like that. I think I think those are really nice steps to keep us kind of grounded in not just the conversation, but like you said, what's happening. And I wonder, as we think about this mix of virtual and in-person contact with people now, are we missing things in this pay attention phase because we can't see? I can't see what you guys all have on your desk. I can't see if you turn your camera off, which how many times does that happen in something where someone drops off for a second? They usually come back, hopefully, but they drop off and you're wondering, is something that's happening on their end impacting their ability to be active participants in what's going down?
You know, my big first, I had a number of ahas with this, but my first one was around the section on diversity. I think we think a lot about, or maybe we have been thinking a lot more about diversity in our classrooms and with students, but remembering the diversity of our teams or lack of diversity of our teams, and the impact that that may have on the collaboration that we have. And so there are a couple like standout ones under that, but the first one is on and I'm reading the Kindle version, so it's hard for me to see the chapter, or I mean to see the page numbers. Page 7 it looks like on the Kindle version. However, when we choose to surround ourselves only with those who agree with us or reinforce or validate our beliefs, rather than those with diverse experiences and opinions, we develop an implicit bias. And we know that we all have implicit biases around lots of different things, but it was just, I was like, oh yeah, like that is very much true, like in terms of, the idea around, and then leading into like the dissonance part about like making sure that we are hearing diverse opinions and ideas. So that was my like my first kind of like, bzz, to it.
Yeah, I like that too, Beth. I always talk about this with people when we talk about the book, this idea of diversity of thoughts and opinions, and people's minds instantly go to diversity, what we think of when you hear that term. And that's not really what we're talking about here. And it is closer to that kind of opinions and your, in this case of what we're talking about with educational coaching, your educational beliefs and the way you do things. And I think that's an interesting layer to drop on this also.
I mean, that could be related to the diversity of
It
our
could,
life.
it could be, it could very much be, but it might not be.
But it might not be, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be.
Yeah, I think that part's always interesting. I like this idea, and they kind of hit on this as they move through the book, this thought of, finding those people who have a different view of things and bringing them into your process. I think a lot of times, a good pot stir can go a long ways to getting something done, because it is the constant kind of questioning of why are you doing that and what was your rationale and what are you hoping to achieve by doing this? And a pot stir is very good for that, because it forces you, I was going to say to pause, that is good. It forces you to pause a little, take a breath, take a step back and say, what is it I'm trying to do here? And am I going about this the right way with the group, with the overall goal of what we're trying to accomplish?
One of the things that we do is like what we call put ideas on the table, and just like, even if it's a crazy idea, like it's an idea, and we might say, everybody always says, well, this one's, out of the box, and I don't want to say this one, but sometimes putting those ideas on the table, or the most extreme idea, even like, well, what if we don't do that at all? Or what if we go all in on that? And putting those extremes on the table or out for consideration, then people could say, well, this, and then it uncovers some of the other biases, or, well, we've already done that as an organization, and, this is why it didn't work, or, anyway, so I think about that a lot. And in order to do that, though, really, really have to have trust, because you can't just put an idea out there that you're like, I don't know how this is going to be received. So some teams you can do that with, and some, I thought we had that, and we were talking about this. We were talking about these walkthroughs, right, recently. And so we had just come from this great meeting on UDL, and then we walk into this other meeting and it's about the walkthroughs, and they're all different. And I'm like, guys, this is just UDL. But they didn't want to hear that. And they were like, you can just go, you don't have to be at this meeting, they said.
Always a comfortable moment, Lauren, when they say, thanks for coming. We're going to keep meeting, but thanks for being here. Take care.
That's whole section on and what you just said, and kind of the section on collaboration moving into dissonance, and then what you just said about trust, was making me think about the book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, which is another one of my go-to resources, because it talks about that need to build trust as a foundational component to this. And I wish I had read this book when I was a school and central office administrator, because I think it really would have influenced me I mean, like, it's going to influence me now, but I think
Mhm.
it would have influenced me even more because it made me think about things that I did and things I could have done differently or used.
What's one of those, Beth? Like right off the top of your head, like what's one like concrete thing that you think you would have done slightly different because of that? Do you have one? Not to put you on the
Yeah,
spot,
I
but
mean,
I was just
there's a
curious.
couple things. I really liked the questions that were on page 11 of the Kindle version, the figure 1.2, dissonance discovering prompts. I think I would have used those as like a beginning of the school year, like even with our teams that were already in place and had been
Mhm.
working together over time. I think those would have been really helpful.
Another one of my post-it notes. There it is. Cause yeah,
Definitely.
they're really, and your pages are lining up, by the way, Beth.
Okay, good. And then
Yeah, just so you
another
know.
one, which is a reflection on me, was on page 13 about extroverts and introverts. Extroverts get so enthusiastic about their team's idea. And it's not so much they unconsciously start taking credit, but definitely I feel like I'm the putting their own stamp on, like I am the extrovert that I need to know when I'm taking over something.
Mhm. Yeah. I really like those. My next, Beth, we're right on track here
Yeah,
with
so
my
that is
post-it notes and your
great.
thoughts as well. 'Cause I also, that's a part that I really personally, those things resonate with me, conversations and discussions about introverts and extroverts, because I'm so one and not the other. And so those are really interesting to me. And it's one of those things that I recognize about myself personally that impacts things I do professionally. And so those kind of conversations I'm very dialed into all the time. And on page 14, you talk about those methods to ensure balance and how you do that. And I really like that. And I think that these opportunities to number 2 in their little checklist there, provide structured quiet time, I think is a really powerful way. Carolyn, it makes me think about something we did in a training. It might have come from this book. It might have just come from just trying to have that realization of giving people, we gave them like 15 minutes to just read through something on their own. And it wasn't a break, it was a work activity, but we didn't ask them to be part of a group to do it. We basically gave them free rein to do whatever they wanted to read it for however long we gave them. And I remember it was a group that, and Carolyn, correct me if I'm wrong, I imagine that this group was not totally bought into what we were doing yet. And when she turns her mic on, she's going to say, yeah. And then in fact, they dropped out soon after.
I was just thinking, I was like, if it's
yeah.
the group I'm thinking of, half the team dropped out. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to give you that part first. I'm going to give you the bad part is half the group dropped out, but half the group stayed. So I'll give you the half full approach to it. But I remember when we gave them this activity, and at first there was that moment of, well, what are we doing now? Like, we're going to go read this. But then I remember people laying down on the ground and going off to do something by themselves, and really getting deeply engrossed in this activity. And I remember the two of us in the back going, oh my God, this is actually working. This is great. It's working. And they came back, and we had given them an opportunity to share ideas as they were going. And then we came back and talked about it too. So we had those moments of every type of person had opportunities to be heard, and have their part in the conversation, but they didn't have to do it in the kind of let's all sit in a circle and talk about it way. Because even the extroverts in the group, even though we told them to do it independently, people gravitated to each other. And those were your extroverts in the group who were like, well, I just want to talk to you about it as we go through it. And you saw that they were kind of looking through it together and making comments. And there were others who went away. One person sat, I don't know why I feel like they sat under a table, but they sat very much by themselves. And they just kind of went through it. But I would argue they had a really powerful connection with that activity. And it makes me think more and more about how do you do that? You know, a lot of times with tech, we think about how do I give you a platform to participate without me knowing you're participating? To respect that introvert person, you know, the chat here is not the way. right? I see it's from you. I know it's you. But then we talk about jam boards and stuff like that. And we say, oh, that's great. You can kind of dump in there and you can just have your say. And I think that tech sometimes makes that easier when you find the right tool, but finding those moments in activities or coaching or training or whatever it is, to find those quiet moments too, where people can all participate in the way they want. So yeah, that's a very long story to say that is something that I work on all the time.
Yeah, and again, I feel like the same way. I feel like it's something I am aware of, like my personality, and it talked about like the different personality types, and I've done a bunch of those. I've done the Myers-Briggs and the Gallup and all of that, and I'm never shocked by the results.
Yeah.
But being aware of what you might be comfortable with, and even just the when you look at archetypes of like collaboration versus independence, and from a cultural standpoint, and where people are, and it's not just, it is, when you talk about those often, it's from a cultural standpoint in terms of like world culture and all of that, but it's also in terms of the culture of that group of people, like how is that facilitated, and how is that and how is that not perhaps facilitated?
Yeah, I had a little note on here about ways of knowing. And this was actually the first class that I took in my PhD program, where we talked about ways of knowing, like women's ways of knowing, critical race theories, ways of knowing, all these different like ways of knowing, and sort of what you bring. And it's like some personality, but then it's also some like, what's your experience, and why and how do you know, and how might you have suppressed some of your ideas based on your, based on your background and your role. So I did have that little note over here on the personality types, but yeah, I think that's something we just always have to be thinking about. Yeah. I too, like Mike and Beth, have my extroverted moments, but I actually really like my own quiet time and like my own introvert. Like I like to just be like alone with my thoughts too a lot, even though I like do the dance between both.
Yeah. No, I hear you. It's really interesting. We're just having this conversation, and now that Leslie's here, I can't even talk about my group, my pre-con group. I'm going to talk about this anyway. Leslie, myself, and Alyssa, and Kelly, and Rachel. There's a whole bunch of us are going to do a pre-con at ATIA, and we were just talking about it the other day. About, isn't it great that there's so many of us, and there's not like 50 participants. There's like 15 participants, but there's 7 of us. And we all had a conversation like, I would love a day like this, because I get these, and it's all kind of conversational. And I realized I said one of the things that probably scares some people the most. I said, there's no place to hide in a group like that. To me, I love that. That to me, I'm like, that's great. You mean there's 7 presenters and there's 15 of us? In theory, I could latch on to 2 people and never let them go all day. And the other 6 could do the same. And while all of us were like, that's going to be amazing, we had a conversation, right, Leslie, about what about the time when that maybe's not amazing for someone? Maybe we should give them a heads up that they're kind of walking into this, because I feel like the 7 of us are going to be, no offense, Leslie, a lot.
I mean,
we're just a lot.
Mike, it's okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think the 7 people we're talking about, they're a lot. And so it's finding that
a
balance.
lot in the best possible way, but still
100%.
Okay. I wasn't even ready to say best possible way, but okay, yeah, we're just a lot. And so this conversation we're having is really a great time, because as we pull this together, it's like, where do you find those, as Lauren points out, those quiet moments for them? Like, what kind of quiet moment can they have? And I think being very conscious of that and being very deliberate of how we build that in will end up being critical for the day, because everybody's going to need a moment, kind of a break. a go off for a second and collect your thoughts and, think about some of my favorite parts of longer presentations like that are, does the presenter give me time to reflect on what I'm taking in and give me time to think about what that looks like going forward? And those are those kind of quiet moments. Those are those and let me all just kind of sit with myself for a little while. And I think that'll be really interesting.
Well, and I
That's
wonder,
go ahead. Sorry, Beth.
I would say, I wonder too, with what you guys have the opportunity to do, there are those people that, what I've noticed in many full day sessions where I try really hard to build in individual work time and stuff like that. And some people really love it and really need it. And some people communicate that they feel like they paid for money for something that they could have done on their own. And so, but with the large number of presenters like you have, you could even build in like, do you want an active discussion right now on what we're doing and to keep talking and working with somebody with this? Or do you want a quiet time and we have enough of us to facilitate quiet time where there's still somebody that you can signal that you want something from? So you kind of almost, you could differentiate even within that. I mean, and I don't know what you guys are doing and I'm not telling you, but I'm just saying
that makes 8 of us. I mean, go ahead.
I'll be at the pool that day, by the way, but I just made me think about that because even it was like there was something in here that even talked about like the collaborative planning time that, as like principals put on school teams and stuff like that, and how it can be great if everybody's in the place of ready to do that, but other times I know because I've had staff tell me like, this is a waste of my time. I'm not, like that kind of thing. So having those, looking at seeing where people are and then the work that you need to do in order to be ready to collaborate. And then it was interesting because I was looking a little forward ahead, like I was looking at chapter 2 and I hadn't read all of chapter 2, but I was saying about this stuff, how this jives with the 5 dysfunctions of a team. And then he has like references to Patrick Lencioni, who's the author of 5 dysfunctions of a team in here. I don't know if it's from that book, but
I like what you said, Beth, that idea of also in this conversation of this collaboration piece is coming in with our expectations of collaboration is an active, I was gonna say an active activity. It's not passive. I mean, you have to come ready and open for it in whatever works within the context of your, I'm going to just call it a personality right now. I know it's not your personality, but in your kind of mindset. So I think that there is responsibility on everyone's part to be ready to be as collaborative as you can. But that also comes with that trust piece and that building over time. So I think that's a really, thank you, Mary. It requires preparation, collaboration. It's active. You don't just show up. I mean, you show up ready. There's nothing worse. How many of us have gone to a meeting where no one shares an agenda beforehand and expects you to be an active participant in that when you have no idea what's going to be discussed and haven't had time to prepare?
Yeah, and I was going to say too, I think a lot of it also is creating that safe space that people feel comfortable sharing as well. Like that I'm not going to ask a question and then feel ridiculous that I asked it or judged because I asked the question, or would my colleagues be irritated that I asked that question? Like, so it's a place, that's a hard thing too in establishing, is making sure that, you're creating that type of environment, whether in a coaching model. Like I work in multiple buildings across the school district. I'm working with hundreds of teachers, all with different skill sets of technology. Some are very skilled, and adept in using technology. Some are absolutely petrified with it. But even today, I got an email from a coworker of mine who is not very adept at using technology and is actually very fearful of it, and very apprehensive. And, he continually reaches out to me, to ask for the help. Like we have, all the computer-based testing that's coming up, and we're doing these like, practice tests that are happening, unfortunately. And, it's a matter of him saying to me, he's like, I'm not really comfortable piloting this with my students. Would you be able to help me go through it ahead of time, prepare me? And it's that environment in the coaching of that he feels comfortable asking me those questions that he may not, he's exposing himself and saying like, hey, I'm not really great at doing this, but I'm okay asking for the help. And I think that that's a really big, important piece of the learning process as well. And especially as many of us in that coaching role, that's an important takeaway from it too.
Yeah. And that is, Leslie, in fact, the second chapter, which is about transparency, is about being that kind of open and positive, both as the coach and the coachee or the other educators around, however you want to look at that, and finding a way to be comfortable with those moments of saying, well, I don't know. Who knows? Who of us knows?
Is it
And then
Mike
we'll go
that's
from there.
freezing up?
Huh?
Was it Mike or was it me?
It's Mike.
Oh, it's me.
I thought it was me too.
I was looking at everyone else. I said,
Glitching
okay,
out,
Leslie's
man.
still moving. Beth is still
Yes.
moving.
Well, that's
Yeah.
upsetting. That's upsetting. I'm the only one here sucking down bandwidth right now. How could I be messed up? Unless the dog is on his phone, I don't understand what just happened here.
Well, it's that's a good segue, Mike, into that like next
Yeah.
chapter, that chapter 2. Like the whole concept of naked service, and the trust and the way trust has to develop. And they talk about, he talks about trust can only exist through transparency. And he talks about like sharing, when coaches share their own flaws and weaknesses.
Right. Yeah. And that idea of resistance, which is what we were just talking about, and why are people resistant to this idea of transparency? Like Leslie said, it's that fear. Two of them were fear of being embarrassed and fear of feeling inferior. Those were two of them right there. And so,
because I don't know about like in number 1 is such a big thing in education. You're not losing your business. Like you're not losing, I mean, you could ultimately lose your position, but it's that I've noticed that, especially with leaders, like they're so terrified of feeling inferior or of being embarrassed.
Yeah.
Oftentimes.
Yeah.
Like nothing is harder than presenting to a group of principals and getting them to contribute and collaborate, because there's fear of like not appearing to not know what they're doing.
right. And what?
It
So
just
yes, and I
speaks
agree.
like-
Go ahead, Lauren.
Oh, I was just going to say, this just speaks Brene Brown, like all over it. Fear, this whole idea of courage and vulnerability, and yeah. So it's actually like the opposite though, is like you might let your guard down and you may feel like, if you're like, oh gosh, I didn't know the answer to that, or, especially as an administrator or a leader, but showing that you're open to learning is going to actually build the trust on the team, and people are going to be it's more relatable.
Yeah. What are some strategies that you've all used to bring those leaders in addition to anything that Lauren just said, like something else, how to get them to buy into this process of coaching a bit? Because
I'm late to the party.
Hi, Alyssa.
Life. But I think with any of these things, when it comes to what has been successful, when I think back, it's being willing to like upfront kind of share from a transparent space yourself, like either a time like paralleled to the situation they're in where like you totally had no idea what was going on and how it would kind of resolved, like so that they can kind of see like it's not just me standing up here going, I have it all figured out. It's like being willing to be wrong and being willing to model that transparency in a scenario. And I think setting the stage from the very beginning, especially if you're working with like administrators or people that are used to having to be in that authoritative state where like being wrong isn't really an option, like setting the stage with them, like this is a safe space. We're not gonna, they're the sessions that even if everybody begs and pleads, I don't record. Like
Mhm.
I will never like record just because I want a principal to feel like that's the safe space for them to have a conversation and not feel like it's going to come back around to get them.
Yeah. Yes, it's not all a gotcha. I agree. I think has anyone used on page 21, there's a survey. It's called the teacher survey for gauging transparency. And it's one of the I put this in line with when I share at presentations the quiet indicators with a team. Where is your team at? This is a very similar type of document where you get wild swings of how people answer this. And that's very much depending on what is your position. And I think these are really good conversation starters. And there's basically two kind of tracks in these questions. I have freedom to express my own ideas. The school leaders feel comfortable freely expressing ideas with me. And it kind of goes back and forth about what that means. And I've even used this just in conversation in a training, not even given the survey, but just to ask them, some of the questions. Do you feel you have freedom to express problems to the leadership of your school? Like, where do you think you're at there?
I
And
don't
just
think I've
asking
used-
some of those.
I don't think I've used this particular survey, but I know in my former school district, we had surveys similar to this
Yeah.
that we delivered on a fairly regular basis. It wasn't this exact one. So I see this within like the yearly staff survey that they.
Exactly. I don't think any of these questions necessarily are earth-shaking on their own. I think these are very similar concepts and questions that we might have asked other times. I just think it's an interesting exercise with people.
Yeah, if I send out a Google form to them ahead of time, if I know I'm going to do, especially for like a multi-part series or whatever, and I want to make sure that it's meeting whatever their needs are, sometimes I will slide either a piece of one of those questions, Mike, or like
Mhm.
one of those questions in the midst of the rest of them.
Right.
And then it's not I'm standing in front of the room and having them kind of answer that in a really uncomfortable space.
Yeah.
But I'm able to get, and I feel like I get pretty honest feedback in those in a Google form because while it's not anonymous, I'm pretty clear that like this data is not going anywhere. Like I'm not reporting it anywhere, but I feel like I get some good insights in, I forget how I word the question. I'd have to look it up. It's something like, if a problem arises, how comfortable do you feel? I forget what I worded. I don't remember, but like it's a situational kind of question to where it's not like all the time. It's like in this specific situation, how comfortable do you feel in this position that you're in to, come forward?
And it's getting to the heart of this conversation. It's getting to the heart of transparency. And it's just asking in sometimes those pointed ways. In the chat, I just dropped the link to the Google Drive folder. So this is one of the reproducibles out of the book. So I've pulled them all down into a Google Drive folder, and there is the link for it. So you can pull the PDFs out. Bunches of them in there, not just the one we're talking about now, but it made me think of it. Let me make sure that I put that out there for everybody. Other things in transparency that you want to talk about? They do a lot towards the end of the chapter, talking about ways to develop greater transparency. And they talk about these ideas of walkthroughs and pulse checks weekly. How's it going? Those kinds of things. I always like that. I'm wondering if anybody has a strategy you use where you find yourself going back to because you get good results of this idea of building community within your space, which ultimately leads to this idea of transparency.
Yeah, I don't know if this is transparency. You can tell me if I'm wrong, Mike. But I will very often, if I know I'm coming out to see a student, or when I first get to them, kind of ask one question, like, what is it that you need?
Mm-hmm.
right now, like what, whether that's specific to the student or that educator, if the educator is really the person I'm coaching. And I think there's a level of transparency that has to be involved. Like, sometimes their answer is literally, I got to go to the bathroom. Can you watch my class? And
Right.
that's not something that like screams the need for transparency. But I think if it's just like, whoa, today was just a train wreck.
Mhm.
Like I need to, like, there is a little bit of rapport building transparency. It's not something that I ask the first 3 or 4 times I go to see a new teacher, because they're like, who the hell, I don't know. I'm not answering your question. Like,
Yeah.
but after that, I think they're used to that question. They're used to like, hey, what do you need from me right now?
Mhm.
And I think it helps to set them at ease that, and again, I've tell them it could be anything. Like, do you need me to go buy you, get you, a water? Do you need, next time I come, would coffee help? Like,
Yeah.
but sometimes it's as like, this math lesson I just did bombed. This kid like looked at me like I was crazy. Help.
Mhm. Yeah. And I think you're right. I think that's not necessarily something we would drop in on day one with a team or a group as we started working with them. You're right. That goes back to what Lauren said before, this idea of building trust before you do these next steps, perhaps. And I think that's along that same line, because you're right. I think in the beginning, you'll get, I hate to call them stock answers, but I feel sometimes I get stock answers from people. This is probably the answer you want to hear as a consultant. So I'm just going to give you this one for right now. And then I have to kind of weed through that and get to maybe what's really happening. Maybe by either being in the same spaces with them or just waiting until we kind of develop that a bit. Because I think, and I think sometimes in the position I come into schools a lot too, I'm looking at this from my perspective. It's difficult because I'm not there all the time. And so when I'm brought into a school, something probably happened to trigger them to reach out to someone else to come in. And so I'm seen as a reaction to something that happened. And so there's already a bit of a wall up, like, who's this guy and what's he want? Is he going to be evaluating me? Not the student. Is he evaluating me and what I'm doing? And so for that, it takes a little while to break that down. Sometimes I can just use the charms that are here to do that. 99.9% of the time I can't, so I got to do something else. But maybe 0.1% really locks in. But I think that becomes really tricky because for sometimes, if I'm not scheduled to go back there multiple times, I sometimes can't get to that point with a team because I'm only scheduled to be there 2 times or 3 times. This goes back to my disdain for the AT expert consultant model. Or come in and do this eval, give us a bunch of good answers, and then never come back. Because you never can get to that point where a team might open up and really bring you into what's happening.
I'm dealing, I feel like I'm dealing with this right now, where I'm really struggling with a school district that I was hired to do some work with. We did a full day in-person training, and then now we've moved into monthly coaching sessions, virtual. And I'm finding like those opportunities to build relationships. It's just so hard. And so there isn't trust. There isn't buy-in.
Right.
I don't know if it's not buy-in to what I'm coaching them on, or if it's just not buy-in to me because I don't have enough relationship and rapport with them. And it's just very hard to develop that. I'm reaching out to the people. I've reached out to the people organizing it, the people that hired me, and said, hey, I don't think this is working. I don't think you're getting your money's worth right now. Is there a different way you want to do this?
Right.
Because I don't think this is effective.
Yeah. Sometimes I find that there's that balance of live and virtual. So your ability to go back and forth on that to help with that, Beth, because I agree. I mean, you can see people in that first session and you're in person and you're all kind of in that same space, and they could leave with a really positive feeling from that one first day. But then if everything that follows is virtual, that starts to erode really fast. And you're just seen as another thing on their schedule if there's nothing that they have that they're looking towards. And
I think that's
Carolyn, so you
exactly
might
it.
too.
And I think a one-shot deal with a large group, it's very hard to establish relationships, even if you've set up some of this which I did set up work time,
Yeah.
and it's still, you can't 50 people. I can't develop a relationship with 50 people in a 6-hour in-person session.
Right. Right.
So something that we're doing, because I don't work for a specific school district either. I work for the state of Michigan, and we help work with ISDs. And when we go in, so let's say I'll do, a 2-3 hour training, and who I usually end up following up with is that point person, the AAC consultant, the AT specialist. They're the ones who already have a really good relationship with a lot of the staff there already. So I'm really coaching them to work more with the staff who are there, because I don't want what Beth has experienced. I've experienced too. Where I'm like, sorry, there's a blizzard, or you're 4 hours away. I can't come out for a 30-minute coaching session. Like, let's just hop on Zoom. But because they're someone who's working inside already, they do have that benefit, that leg up, versus me coming in as an external person saying, hey, like, you can trust me. I promise I'm not going to run to your principal and tell them all these things you're saying.
Because
Yeah.
who doesn't believe the person that says, trust me?
Mhm.
Right.
Mhm.
But and Carolyn, it's you're kind of you're trading on the cachet that person has at that point.
Mhm.
Because look, this person said I'm okay, and this person,
Mhm.
and if you think this person's okay, now you got to hope they think that person's okay. So they think that person's okay. I must be, just by relation, okay, or okay-ish at least,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Just enough to be like, maybe I'll listen to what this person has to say. But I do think those intermediate steps of seeing people again becomes very powerful.
Mhm.
I'm doing this in a grant now, and I'm actually going there next week. No, sorry, it's this week. It's tomorrow. All right. Wait a second. I got to write that down to remember I'm leaving to go there tomorrow. I thought it was next week. Now I'm totally thrown as to what I was going to say. But we met in person, and then we've been doing these kind of virtual things in between, and recording them and posting them to like an LMS so that people can see them, doing all this stuff. And now we're going to spend an entire day with them. And when I look at the content of what we're going to do, on the surface, you might look at it and go, boy, that's kind of light on content. But I think the underlying current there is to build, or is to solidify those relationships to finish our school year. And so I'm looking at this as just kind of here's my chance to lock you into what we're doing, because we're going to be face-to-face. I might even buy lunch for the group, all those kind of fun things. We're giving them a giant crate of free tools for participating, and, bribes always work. I don't care what anybody says. A bribe is a bribe is a bribe. But I think that in itself will help carry us through the rest of our things, where we won't see these people again in person until May. So this has got to carry us through now. And so that's been our strategy, is to kind of find these kind of drop-in points throughout a year, where we saw you, we see you virtually, and then we finally see you again, and we spend an entire day with you, just hoping to develop that. Because these people also don't all work in the same building. They're from different buildings and different schools. We're bringing them together. And so that'll be interesting. But yeah, it's part of that strategy of how to do that, how to build this, how to make yourself part of their team as they go forward. And that's through this idea of transparency and things like this.
I'm looking through, I'm skimming through some of chapter 2 that I hadn't gotten as deep into. And one of the things it talks about is the 360-degree appraisals, which is a feedback tool for collecting data. I wonder, you could, it seems like they're talking about it being able to collect data as a coach, like on your performance as a coach. But I don't see how they've got those forms and stuff like that reproducible. Has anybody used that? I think that might be really interesting to use. I wonder if
So
anybody's used that
prior
before?
to the current like evaluative system we were using one that was based on 360. And it's basically business model.
It
The
is, right, it's a business
360
thing.
is basically a business model to kind of look at an organization from all angles, if that makes sense, thus the 360 part of it. And depending on like what you used it for, there are a bunch of like free feedback tools out there that kind of help guide, like if you're a startup business or, and I'm sure that one of them could be used to
Mhm.
kind of like guide it. I mean, I don't think that it's any different than any other like feedback. It's just kind of a trademark structured 360 feedback. And it's meant to be that like it's 100% confidential. Like you're basically using a survey monkey that's not, so I think depending on the group, it might be harder if it's like a group of 5 to get really good 360 feedback. If it's a group of 180 and they know it's randomized and, and not there, that you're getting information back. So yeah, Mike, thanks for putting the
Yeah, you're welcome.
links in there.
And some of the other thing when I think about with the 360 degree, it's very businessy. All the things you see about it are very focused on business, but that's okay. I think we can mold that a bit. And I think what the approach might be would be, we get feedback from the people we deliver the service to, the training to. So if this is like a training coaching model, the people we've coached, the educators, we also get feedback from their administration of how they've seen a change. Have they seen a change? We get feedback from the students and the learners about are they seeing something new in their environment. So that would be the 360 part of it, is that you're basically tapping into all those stakeholder groups. Even though I might not be delivering coaching directly to a student, I might ask them to see if the service they're getting has changed as a result of our time together. So your questions will be different. The what your expectations for collecting would be different. But it's that idea of looking beyond the group that you might be working with, and instead looking at who are all those groups that person might impact and touch as they go forward. Ooh, there's a whole
Mary,
bunch of sample
what do you
questions.
mean by I like to limit webinars to 10, like to 10 people in a webinar or to 10 webinars?
Yeah, to 10 people, because that way it's a more intimate conversation and, people have a chance. And then I'll just schedule more webinars, if I had 8, if there's more than 10.
I think it's that idea of going back to what are you looking to accomplish with that activity you're doing? And so the way Mary describes that, to me, Mary's talking about coaching, not an information webinar where I, have 200 people go and we go through a set. Yeah. And I think you're right. I think that like anything else, the larger the group, the more difficult it is potentially virtually to connect with all of them. You'll connect with 1 or 2.
Yeah.
And you'll get 1 or 2 people to talk. I see this in some of my classes sometimes when I teach, is that the minute we go to a breakout room where I'm going to ask them to be active participants, someone inherently has a computer meltdown, a Wi-Fi issue, something else comes up, and then they're back 20 minutes later. And I get that. That's fine. I understand the rationale for that. But I think we have to understand that, that can happen. And that's, again, the struggle sometimes of all virtual, right? Is that we're not in the same space. We're not really focused on the task at hand all the time. It's too easy to not be. I just got called out on a meeting before we came on because we were having a conversation and the conversation took a turn to the 2 other people and I wasn't involved. So I heard my phone buzz and I went to do email. And when I looked back, I realized those 2 people were waiting for me to answer a question. And I was like, oh, sorry, everyone. I got distracted by my phone because I heard my email go off. And then I had to refocus, but it was too easy to not be part of that conversation for just a minute. But again, how different is that from any other thing? In person, one of my favorite things I ever learned at a UDL training was we spend all this, and I've probably said it to all of you in one time or another, we spend all this time working on engagement and making sure someone's engaged constantly. Assume someone will disengage at some point. Your job is to re-engage them and give them a path to re-engage with what's happening. And how do you do that? Visuals, the chat, link, whatever it is to bring them back into it, becomes their path back into the conversation. And I remember that was the one nugget I took from that training. And I love that idea of that, because you're right. It's so, that person's so right. It's, to spend all our time working to keep that person engaged from minute 1 to minute 60 or a minute, whatever the end of that is. It's a thankless, unlikely to be successful task. And so instead, how do we find other ways to do that? I think a lot of the things that we talk about in this book will get us there as we go through, not just the 2 chapters we talked about today, but the continuing as we go on. See what I did there? Do you all see what I just did? That's what they call in the business a pivot. You're welcome. Only because I see what time it is. And I know I have 3 meetings stacked up right after this. So I'm mentally on board here with what's happening. Other thoughts from chapter 2 about the transparency?
Mike, you're disengaging? Okay.
I disengaged. I am now re-engaged, Lauren. Here I am back and re-engaged. Only because my calendar buzzed on my phone that said 10 minutes to the next thing.
Yeah.
Other thoughts from chapter 2? Other takeaways? I love this book, by the way. I'll fill the space with that comment. I do love this book. It's easy to read. Kelly, when you find out who stole yours that was delivered yesterday, you're going to see it's a great, easy read.
I've already solved the mystery.
The mystery solved? Is one of your kids holding the book?
Actually, no, it was still in the mailbox. Our mail, like, it gets delivered twice a day sometimes, and it's like it'll be like 7 o'clock at night. So I don't walk down the hill for that.
As long as the mystery's solved, that's all that matters. It's sitting in the mail. And this is a book that can be kind of bent to stick in a mailbox.
United States Postal Service mail gets delivered twice a day.
They'll deliver any packages usually in the morning,
wow.
And then the evening it's whatever goes in the mailbox.
I'm so impressed because that doesn't happen.
Some days we get 0. Many days we get 0. That's what they've been doing. They cut staff, and I'm like, right. Anyway, that's a whole nother
So what we've all learned is we move to where Kelly is, and we're going to get mail multiple times a day. Mail just will come all the time.
Or you don't, because you don't want mail.
Yeah, that's
right.
true.
I feel like Kelly lives somewhere cold, and I'm not moving there.
Kelly, where do you live?
Yeah, Kelly, where do you live?
Chattanooga.
Okay.
It's not that cold. Chattanooga's not bad.
It's like cold adjacent.
Yeah.
It's only cold. It's like potentially cold.
I agree with you, Mike, though. It's funny because like I picked up the book and I was like, all right, like let's brace ourselves for like, a work related type of read.
Snorefest.
Right. And I was like, oh, this is gonna be like, and I was like pleasantly surprised. Like it's a very like pleasant, easy read. And I was like, all right, I'm in.
And practical, and it does a nice job of, and I kind of think from all of us that are here, I have a sense of who we all are. It's reinforcing of things that we're doing, but it's building on that for us. And that's what I think makes that really powerful. Is that it gives us those aspects of, that moment. It's a pat yourself on the back moment. And then it's also a moment to draw and write a Post-it note all along the edge. And so there you go. There's my book has been through the.
Okay, I did have one more. I had one more little Post-it note.
Go ahead. What was your other Post-it note?
It was about norms of collaboration, like before you begin the collaboration, in the transparency, and then also in the like diversity and getting stakeholders to sort of build trust and get buy-in on this meeting. And that's something that we've done under different leadership. We've done that as a whole department. And it's been really nice because we have 7 norms of collaboration that we do, like, that you don't multitask, that you put ideas on the table, et cetera, et cetera. And so we have these 7 norms that follow the norms that we have all studied together from cognitive coaching.
Yeah.
And it's really nice because when we have harder meetings, we sometimes we post them and they're like on the table right there and they're like all around your collaboration work spaces. And I think that's kind of helped shift a little bit of our culture, but we're not talking about them quite as much. And I have to say, it's a little bit obvious that we haven't revisited our norms.
Yeah.
So,
and I think that's really important, right? I mean, it's all about changing the way we approach these things and recognizing that I love this idea of creating norms and then publicizing them in our space while we're doing these things, because it reinforces the point that all of us have a responsibility and all of us are a valuable part of this process. That norm says to me, I want to make sure that you're part of this. Like Lauren, if I put that norm out, I'm saying to you, Lauren, I value what you say and I want to make sure you are saying it.
Yeah, it sounds kind of cheesy, but it's not. And I'm really glad that we talked about it, because one of the things that I was also saying as one of my goals is that the student is at the center of every conversation that we have. And nobody else said that. And I was like, how can we move forward? Now I see why we're not moving forward, because my ideas were very different than fixing tech problems or pleasing the community or whatever that group was saying. And I was like, okay, this is something I think about. And it was good because then we were able to talk about that, because I was I just assumed that everybody was coming from this perspective. So
and that's why sometimes you write those things
this group.
and that's why you write them down, right? So that people can see that. You can have that moment wait a second, are we not all aligned in our thoughts as we move into this? Because that's about aligning everybody to make sure. Yeah. And that becomes a non-negotiable, right? You're like, Lauren, but that's my thing. That's what we should be doing. Why aren't we doing that? If you don't think that, why don't you think that? Yeah. Makes me think, and I've told this story 1,000 times, makes me think of an IT director who told me, I didn't get into this job to work with kids. I got into it to work with computers. To paraphrase the comment, it was bro, you're in the wrong spot, man. Look around. Your kids, your computers are being worked on by kids. They are your customers. You missed a big moment there.
Yeah.
So funny. And Carolyn wrote in the chat, Lauren, that's so interesting that you recognize that the norms haven't been revisited or reviewed in a while, because it reiterates how important they really are.
Yeah, and I think that question of turning it back to them of why isn't that? That piece of it is then having that discussion, because maybe there's another perspective to it that, that you're not seeing or that wasn't, brought to your attention, and there's a way to kind of merge it all together, but I think it's those, reflective questions of well, all right, explain to me what your thinking is then.
Right, exactly. Where are you at now in this? Yeah.
And it's a calibration point too, right? Where are we? Because I feel we're woo, the compass is circling around. I thought I knew where we were going, but maybe I don't. And maybe I'm the problem now, because I thought everything was good, but we haven't revisited. And so it's good. It's good for me to, maybe I need to bring that up. Thanks for helping me reflect on this, because maybe I need to bring that up and say hey, we haven't actually talked about that. And we used to put that on the top of every single one of our agendas, and it's in our spaces, and we would talk about that. And then we would make reference I'm just going to put this idea on the table. I'm going to make sure I'm present for this meeting. I'm going to, and we would say these things out loud to one another. So maybe we need to do
the same part of the vocabulary of your team. But if like other things, if you don't continue to use that vocabulary, it can fade away.
Yeah, we've had some leadership changes. So some things that we did a lot, and we had to be very intentional during a lot of Zoom and pandemic stuff, that now it's fading away and it needs to come back.
Got to come back. Exactly. All right, everybody. Well, I had planned for us to meet next week, and then Naomi reminded me that most people have off next week. So let's not meet next week. Let's meet on the 23rd, and we'll do the next 2 chapters. Those are chapters 3 and 4, inquiry and discourse. So you have your reading assignment. It won't be that bad. It's going to be painless. I promise. It's going to be easy to go through. Put your sticky notes or your mark it up, however you mark things up. And we'll come back together and we will talk about this as we go forward.
I really love that we spent this time doing this. I know we don't usually have like a structured thing, but I found this very helpful personally. And I think it's forcing me to take a few minutes of my time to read the book. And it's an easy thing.
Yeah.
It's not a.
I agree. It made me go back in and reread the chapters, which I think was really helpful too. And I like this. Instead of trying to cram all of them in 1 hour, we'll spread it out. And we can have these kind of slow rambling conversations about a chunk as we go forward. So I love it. So yeah, it's great.
This is good. Look, our group can do flexible and, the open, no agenda, and also the structure. So
We've really shown ourselves to be quite impressive as a group. I'll say it.
Can I reveal myself to not being impressive? And I know this is being recorded, so I love that part too. But what is the book? I'm like, this sounds amazing. And I am so like, I came late to the table. Thank you. Oh, yeah, we talked about that in other ones. Sorry.
okay.
Non-impressive alert.
We apologize.
Love you. Just
Wow.
the same.
That was great. We're here for you. We had great conversation and you knew it was about something, but not what.
Yeah. Hey, I took away all of your nuggets, even though I was like, I have no idea what they're talking about.
Perfect. Now it's time to buy the book and you can bring yourself and be an active person.
I feel like my days of activity are coming. Get ready.
My days of activity.
Who's going to ATIA?
Me.
Oh, Carolyn.
Sorry, I didn't raise my hand.
Carolyn.
That's a sad face.
I just wanted to see who we can hang out with at the pool. All right, pool bar meeting. We can discuss this.
I'm going virtually because the wedding of the century kind of did us in.
Century. How exciting.
Weddings are definitely more important.
They are for
Next
sure.
year at the pool, Beth.
All right, it's a deal.
Oh yeah, is this like the last year that it's at this hotel?
Yes,
Isn't
this
it
is the
going
last year for the Carib, and then it moves on to, I should know this, but I don't. Some other,
like
the
Marriott or
maybe?
something?
Marriott
Yeah.
World.
Yeah, so I
Marriott by
am.
Disney World. Yep. All right, everybody. Very good.
I hope they have as nice a pool bar area because
Yeah.
I appreciate.
I agree.
Yeah.
To break another one in.
Yeah.
Not me, because this is still being recorded, but other people might. I'm not gonna do that.
It's going to be hard because I have that one memorized. I don't need to look at the map anymore.
Exactly. It'll be all new again. It'll be like going to a new place. It's fun. It's like a new vacation-ish spot. Wonderful. All right, everybody. It was a pleasure.
Bye, everyone.
Have a great week. We'll
Bye,
see you next
friends.
week for town hall.